Democracy or dictatorship? That's one of the subjects that we talk about in the book, Change to Chains, the 6,000-year quest for control. Well, one of the most important examples of democracy, of people ruling themselves without a king, is Athens. Will and Ariel Durant wrote in their book, The Story of Civilization, they wrote, "The realization of self-government was something new in the world. Life without a king had not yet been dared by any great society. Out of this proud sense of independence there in Athens, individual and collective, came a powerful stimulus of enterprise for every Greek. It was their liberty that inspired them to incredible accomplishments in arts and letters and science and philosophy." Thomas Jefferson wrote to Mr. Correa in 1823, he says, "Greece was the first civilized nation which presented examples in government of what man should be." This idea that when the king is in control and he thinks he's smarter than everybody else and he decides what you're going to do with your life and what your kids are going to do and what the land should be used for, and he's got all of his bureaucrats to carry out his will, you don't have the freedom or incentive to pursue your God-given dreams and abilities. You are tempted to do whatever it takes to please the king and nothing more. In other words, if you work hard and be creative, you won't get rewarded for it, or if you do, it's taken away and you don't benefit from it. And so people don't get creative. But what happened in Athens was, without a king, everybody was sort of left to themselves, and they could pretty well do whatever they wanted. And so they realized, gee, I can start looking inside of myself and seeing what gifts and talents and abilities, and it started creativity. Well, in a democratic society, to get an agenda implemented required influencing large numbers of citizens. So here we have the situation. There's no king in Athens. People make all the decisions. But how do you influence a lot of people? Greek theater. Greek theater became a remarkable tool to accomplish this, particularly plays called tragedies or comedies. They were political satires. They were sort of like the Jon Stewart and Jay Leno and David Letterman of the day. They would get together and make fun of the different politicians and political views, and they'd extol some and ridicule others. And so in Athens was not just the advent of people deciding for themselves, it's the advent of theater, where the theater writer could push an agenda by putting on these plays. So from that time till now, media and plays and Hollywood has always been political. You think, really? All my favorite TV shows are political? Yes. They subtly ridicule some points of view and extol other points of view. I can get into that more later, but you can pretty well understand that. Well, in Athens, government was controlled by laws, and laws were controlled by voters, and voters were influenced by public opinion, and public opinion was molded by the media and entertainment in the short run and education in the long run. And so when we look at Athens and we look at this situation, we see that they were the beginning of this idea that you get to decide your own fate. Now think of it just for a minute. If we got rid of the patent laws, then the moment you create something, it could be stolen and taken by the government. But in America, we have patent laws so that you can work and you own that idea. You can write a book and own the copyright to it. You can stay up all night in your garage and create something, and you can own that. And so you are motivated. You're also motivated to study, because if you study, you have the possibility of earning more money if you know more information, and you can be more useful to an employer. And so you are motivated to improve yourself. You're motivated to be creative because you can benefit from it, not the king. But the more the government takes away from what you do, you lose enthusiasm to do it. Why work really hard when it's going to be taxed and taken away anyway? And so it begins to turn off the faucet on this great creative atmosphere that we have in America. Well, in Athens, there was an alliance with Pericles and with other different city-states, and it created sort of an imperial empire Pericles promoted a popular social policy permitting the poor to watch theater plays and the state paying for their admission fees. This is sort of interesting. So Pericles, he's this democracy, people rule, but now he's starting to get a lot of power. And what does he do? The state pays for people to go see the plays. Well, now, first thing, oh, that's really nice, until you realize that, wait a second, if they're being indoctrinated with certain points of view, he would want them to get that point of view. Pericles enacted legislation granting lower classes access to the political system. And Pericles lowered the property requirements to hold civil office. And Pericles had the government pay generous wages to citizens to serve on juries. And Athenian private citizens who did not take seriously their duty to educate themselves on the issues, and in particular to participate in politics, they were called idiotus. So in Athens, everybody votes on everything. And if you decide you want to stay home and you don't educate yourself on every political issue, you're called an idiotus in Athens. Well, in his funeral oration, Pericles, this was a famous speech that Pericles gave, Pericles stated, "It is only we who regard the one, not participating in the duties of politics, not as unambitious, but as useless." So back in Athens, not only could you participate in politics, you had to participate in politics, and if you didn't, you were useless. So here we have this brand new thing called a democracy in Athens. Theater plays a big part, but everybody has to be involved to make it work. Historian Plutarch mentions criticisms of Pericles. He said, "Many others say that the people were first led on by him into allotments of public lands, festival grants, and distributions of fees for public service, thereby falling into bad habits and becoming luxurious and wanton under the influence of public measures instead of frugal and self-sufficing." What was he talking about? Well, here's Pericles almost submitting to this trend of wanting to reaccumulate power by giving out free stuff and getting people to like him. And then the more they would like him, the more they would allow him to have more power. Well, historian Thucydides wrote that Athens was in name only a democracy, but in fact, it was governed by its first citizen, Pericles. So again, even Athens, with its democracy, tends to want to go back. Athens sent its navy to help Egypt in an attempt to rebel against Persia. Remember Persia? It's in the Bible with Cyrus. He's the one that allowed them to rebuild the temple, and then Darius, and then Xerxes, who was around the time of Queen Esther. But Persia was the big world power. Greece had sent its navy to help Egypt against Persia, but it was defeated. After this, several cities tried to leave the Delian League, but Pericles laid siege to them and says, "Sorry, you can't leave." And he forced them to capitulate. So instead of it being, hey, this is this voluntary thing, we're all going to work together with Athens, all of a sudden now he's forcing them to stay in. Sort of like a civil war, and they were the South wanting to leave, and he says, no, you can't leave. Then a tax was placed on all the allied cities to provide for their common defense, and the money was placed in the alliance's treasury at Delos. So we got this city called Delos, and Pericles says, okay, you can't leave, and I'm going to have the navy to protect you, but I'm going to tax you all, and we're going to put all your tax money into Delos. Then comes the big move. Pericles moved the treasury from Delos to Athens, and he decided to withdraw large amount of this money for his ambitious building projects, which included the Acropolis and the Parthenon. The Acropolis is a big hill. On top of it, this Parthenon, this temple. If you see tourist pictures of Athens, it's the one on top of the hill. I've been to Athens numerous times, and it's still there. And that's where they had a gold statue of Athena. And this was considered to be some of the greatest artistic creations of the ancient world. But nevertheless, it was done through Pericles taxing and then taking the money and then using the money without the other people having a say. So again, this is this trend to concentrate.